Chapter 2 is called Some Objections, and in it Lewis addresses some common arguments you'd expect to find. I won't go through them all to save time, but we'll sum them up right here. The law of human nature isn't really instinct. One can see a man drowning and have an impulse to save him, and an impulse to say save. But he knows the moral thing to do is save the man. The law of human nature is not a convention-type law, like don't drive on the wrong side of the road, but is more of a fact of life, like gravity. And 3, this theme is repeated heavily in the 3rd chapter, how can you judge morality systems unless there is a perfect morality standard out there? What he's doing is setting up an argument for the existence of a perfect moral law, and then point out that there needs to be a perfect being to create such a perfect law. But we're still stuck on the problem I brought up in the previous video. Religion's morality doesn't look anything like what Lewis is putting forward. Let me change some things around to show you what I mean. Let's say you are in the middle of a city that is being destroyed by an army, and you find a baby. Part of your instinct wants to save the baby. Part of your instinct wants to leave the baby alone because he'll slow you down. You know that it is moral to save the baby. Does this sound close enough to the drowning example? Good. Now enters religion. God commanded that the baby should be smashed against a rock until it's dead. It's a very real example from the Bible that soldiers in God's army found themselves in. Now, I already know that the comment section is going to have some objections, so let me curb that a bit. The complaint will be, that was Old Testament, you need to read the New Testament to see what Christians believe, Couple points. 1. Both Old and New Testament apply to Christianity. Without the Old Testament laws, there is absolutely no reason for Jesus to die. No original sin, no commandments broken, no absurd laws in Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy that are being violated, nothing. If you're arguing for a new covenant that invalidates the old, you've got a long way to go to explain why Jesus is trying to complete the old with an unnecessary death. Number 2. It's the same God for both New and Old Testament. If you really want to say that God changed his mind on what is moral, then you've invalidated Lewis's upcoming argument that morality stays the same throughout time. You've also ruined the argument of objective morality that Christian evangelists love to talk about. 3. Your reaction is all the proof I need to prove my point. Sure, you might win the battle that the Old Testament doesn't apply anymore and those horrible things are locked away in the past, but you've lost the war. You've shown that your inherent morality, the law of human nature, is superior to what God's morality is. But hey, if you want to argue that it was a different time, a different place, go right on ahead. You're further disproving Lewis's idea of objective God-instilled morality with every single word you say. Lewis's point 2. The law of human nature is more like the law of gravity than it is a convention like driving on the correct side of the road. What Lewis is arguing is that morality isn't learned, it's just fact. Like the laws of gravity, thermodynamics, and mathematics, the law of human nature explains how things do work. Again, Lewis might be onto something, but the answer he's supplying to explain this phenomenon is religion, and that ruins everything he's trying to establish. If morality is so inherent and it doesn't need to be learned, what is the point of Christianity? The 10 Commandments are obvious. The really absurd laws are just conventions, the kind of thing that Lewis was careful to exempt from his law of human nature. The teachings of Jesus are so obvious that other cultures had them centuries before Jesus was born. Indeed, some of those myths were directly lifted from other religions. We're really only left with Christianity's last contribution to morality, that vicarious redemption through murdering an innocent man is the only way to save yourself from a crime someone else committed to appease a deity you've never met. If you think that this bit of morality is counterintuitive, then it is also counter the law of human nature. Lewis goes on to suggest that there is some kind of, and I'm going to add the word perfect, moral standard that humans are in tune with, which allows them to judge the morality of others. After all, how can we judge those Nazis for killing all those Jews if Nazi morality says it's okay? Yeah, Lewis has dragged the Nazis into this book, and it looks like he has a point. If Nazi morality says it's okay to kill the Jews, and there is a perfect moral standard that says it's bad, then Nazi morality is obviously inferior and corrupt. As an aside, I blame Lewis for the constant comparisons between atheists and Nazis and Hitler. This despite Germany being 54% Protestant, 40% Catholic nation, and Hitler being a very outspoken Catholic, whom the Catholic Church loved. But this is still Lewis's best point he's made so far. How do we say the Nazis are bad unless we have a shared morality system that they are accountable to? Great question, but answering God did it isn't going to work, especially when we have better answers that don't rely on ghosts or other undiscovered supernatural phenomena. Perhaps it's social evolution. Maybe it's a cultural meme that just spread throughout the world, or maybe it's just a massive coincidence. There's no reason to assume God did anything, especially when his morality is different than ours. So back to the idea that there is a perfect morality out there somewhere, and by this we can all know what perfect morality is. Time to change things up a bit to show why this does not work. We all know what beautiful women look like, yes? For the most part, folks can agree which woman is more attractive than another. Maybe if they're close in attractiveness, you might get a split decision, but by and large, folks would classify women on a 1 to 10 scale roughly where they belong. You with me? So obviously, there is a perfectly beautiful woman out there that we compare all women against. Right? Okay, I know it's shallow, but the point still stands. How can we know if a woman is beautiful or not unless there's a perfect woman out there that we all know that we can compare all women against? This is what happens when you try to make something subjective, like attractiveness and morality, objective. And as an aside, I really do apologize for literally objectifying women with this example. But I think the slight on decency shows how Lewis has committed the same slight. Lewis is trying to argue for an objective morality, something I address in my series God's Kangaroo Court. Here's a quote from Mere Christianity. For example, one man said to me 300 years ago people in England were putting witches to death. Was that what you call the rule of human nature or right conduct? But surely the reasons we do not execute witches is that they do not believe there are such things. If we did, if we really thought there were people going about who had sold themselves to the devil and received supernatural powers from him in return and were using these powers to kill their neighbors or drive them mad or bring about bad weather, surely we would all agree that if anyone deserved the death penalty, these filthy queaslings did. Here's a fun quote that undermines everything Lewis has said, but it takes some explaining. First of all, Lewis is trivializing a very real and dark part of Christian history. Witches weren't generally killed for murdering other people, they were killed for all sorts of things, but rarely murder, and if it was murder, there was never any proof. Witch hunts happen to be a fascination of mine. The majority of witches were killed for being single women, and with their magical powers they did such dastardly deeds as make the weather something other than planned, make a section of crops not grow, make someone's cat behave oddly. That's an actual thing that people got the death penalty for. Give someone the flu, and having sex with the devil. The only bits of evidence provided for these, crimes were a frenzied witness or a confession obtained by torturing the poor girl. Then the witch was tortured to death. This, Mr. Lewis, is what you're really defending. Now these, filthy queaslings, what is so morally upright about killing them? My crops didn't grow. Therefore, murdering someone is the correct course of action? My inherent morality disagrees. I wouldn't murder anyone because my cat behaved oddly, my crops didn't grow, or even if I got the flu. Seems disproportionate somehow. If I saw a witch in the same room as the devil, and she wished for a winning lotto ticket, and he handed her one, I still have no grounds at all to murder this girl, or wish her harm. Heck, if I turned a corner and saw in some dark alley some woman actually having sexual congress with the devil, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't murder her, can't punish her in any way. What's she doing wrong? There's no moral transgression here. Meanwhile, pick any Dark Ages peasant mob, as Christian as you please, accuse some peasant girl of making a cat behave oddly, and there's going to be a burning. Witch hunts are still going on today. Now that's all fine and good about the witch hunts, but Mr. Lewis, what was that you were saying about the Nazis? Something about how even though they thought they were acting as a group and they're doing great things, but what they're doing was really terrible, that they're still under the law of human nature? Mr. Lewis, does this apply to your witch burners? You seem to think it doesn't, which completely negates everything you've said up to this point.